Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take stacks of high-level research, philosophical insights, and behavioral science, and really just distill them into actionable, surprising, and truly memorable knowledge for you.
Our mission today is, I think, arguably one of the most fundamental challenges that any high-level professional faces. We are diving deep into the dual nature of decision-making.
Oh, the two sides of the coin.
Exactly. We're juxtaposing the absolute gold standard of intellectual rigor.
Yeah.
The systematic, the philosophical, the statistical process you need to make a sound judgment against the chaotic, often comical, but ultimately devastating behavioral hurdles that stop us from actually doing it.
It really is the ultimate tension, isn't it? That divide between knowing what to do and actually doing it, between having that perfect level eye evidence and just having zero follow through.
Right.
So we're going to spend the first half of this deep dive charting that rigorous path, the intellectual side, starting with the very philosophical bedrock of knowledge itself.
And to start, we really have to lay the foundation on why getting the evidence right in the first place is so critical. It reminds me of that quote that really frames the whole challenge.
The Mark Twain one.
The Mark Twain one.
Yeah.
It ain't so much what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so.
Ah, it's so perfect. It's so elegantly sharp. It's not ignorance that gets you. It's confirmation bias that you've dressed up as certainty.
Yes.
And it just highlights that fundamental need to critically review evidence, to question your own assumptions, and to check for validity, which is, that's the core mission of any evaluator.
Precisely. Our source material today, it painstakingly defines these high standards for evidence, rooted in logic and philosophy, the tools of reason. But then, and this is the pivot, we turn to this surprisingly vivid internal look at the human brain.
The instant gratification monkey.
The instant gratification monkey, which sabotages those rational standards every single day, and it doesn't matter how impeccable your evidence hierarchy is.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the foundations of knowledge and judgment, and that means we need to drill down to the word we use constantly: evidence. We throw that word evidence around all the time in professional settings, but I feel like if we don't start with a clear, shared definition, the whole process just breaks down.
It does.
So what are the origins and the fundamental definition our sources give us?
It's incredibly useful to anchor ourselves in the etymology. The word evidence comes to us through Middle English, but its roots are in the Latin word evidentia.
Okay, what did that mean?
It literally meant obvious to the eye or mind. And then Old French gives us evidence, which meant appearance from which inferences may be drawn.
So that suggests two layers right away, doesn't it? There's the thing you see, the immediate observation, and then there's the intellectual work you have to do to draw an inference from it.
Yes, exactly. And, generically, evidence is just information presented to support or dispute an assertion. But what the sources immediately highlight is that evidence exists on a critical spectrum of strength.
And it's the evaluator's job to figure out where on that spectrum any given piece of information actually falls.
Right. And that spectrum is just vast.
I can imagine.
At the absolute strongest end, you have evidence that provides direct proof of the truth of an assertion. It's an undeniable fact. But as you move toward the weakest end, you get evidence that is merely consistent with your assertion.
Meaning it doesn't rule out other possibilities.
It doesn't rule out other competing or even contradictory assertions. And the moment that information leaves the source and enters someone's mind, the integrity of that whole spectrum is threatened by something we have to get out of the way up front.
Bias.
Bias. It's the critical immediate caveat. The presence of bias, personal, professional, whatever, it influences the credibility of how evidence is perceived, no matter where it actually falls on that spectrum.
So if the evidence helps my career or my wallet, I'll see it as stronger than it is.
Exactly. And if it challenges a belief I hold really deeply, I'll immediately start to scrutinize it and, degrade it.
Bias is always there, waiting to influence what we think we know for sure. Okay, so before we get to complex research, we have to clarify the actual building blocks, data and information. The sources make a distinction here that is absolutely foundational.
It is, and they're used interchangeably all the time, which is so dangerous in a high-stakes environment. They're absolutely distinct. A datum, that's the singular form, is a single, discrete, objective element. It's a fact. It exists by itself, and it hasn't been interpreted.
It has no meaning on its own.
No meaning, no context. To make it concrete, think of a hospital setting, a single blood pressure reading, 12/80. That is a datum, just a number.
Or in a warehouse, we have 47 widgets.
Exactly. That's the raw material. Information, on the other hand, is data that's been organized, linked, interpreted, structured. It's processed data that's been made useful. It gives you context. It answers the who, what, where, when questions.
Okay, so using your example, the datum is 12080. The information is realizing that this reading, in the context of the patient's severe heart failure diagnosis and their current diuretic protocol, is dangerously low and needs immediate intervention.
You got it. The raw fact has been given meaning because you layered it with context.
Or with the widgets, the datum is 47. The information is realizing the inventory has dropped below the reorder point of 50 for the third week in a row, and that correlates directly with a 5% increase in production delays. You've linked the data to show a pattern.
And understanding that distinction is, it's just foundational for anyone in evaluation of scholarship. If you put flawed data in, you get flawed information out, and your judgment will be skewed. You'll end up with that exact Twain problem.
Acting confidently on something that just isn't so.
And that takes us right back to the philosophical base of all this. We need to quickly anchor this in the branch of philosophy that deals with knowledge itself, epistemology.
Epistemology, I love that word. It's the investigation into the origin, nature, validity, and limitations of human knowledge. It's basically the study of how we know what we know.
And it goes all the way back to Aristotle, who formalized the role of logic as this framework for reasoning about evidence. Logic gives us that critical structure.
And when we talk about logic in this context, we're dealing with what? 3 core components?
3 core components. A proposition, which is just a statement that can be true or false.
Then a premise, which is a statement you believe is true, and it serves as the basis for your argument. It's the starting block.
And when you take those premises together, they lead to an inference or a conclusion. That's the logical consequence you draw from them. The entire scientific method is really just a sophisticated way of testing if our premises lead to valid conclusions.
Which naturally brings us to the 2 big styles of reasoning we use, inductive and deductive. This is a major fork in the road for research.
It is. Deductive reasoning is the path of certainty, assuming your premises are true. You move from a general, universal truth to a specific instance. So if we establish the premise that all patients with condition X respond to treatment Y, and John has condition X,
then we can deduce that John will respond positively to treatment Y. It's certain.
The conclusion flows necessarily from that universal premise. Inductive reasoning, on the other hand, is really the engine of new knowledge, but it's often riskier. You move from the specific apart to the general, the whole. It's observation and generalization.
So the sources give that great example. If a patient-turning device reduces pressure ulcers on 1 hospital unit over 3 months.
Induction is that mental leap where you assume it's going to work on all the other units in the hospital.
And the risk is huge. You're generalizing beyond what you've actually seen. The conclusion might not be true because, I don't know, maybe that successful unit had more staff or younger patients or some other confounding factor you haven't even thought about yet.
Inductive leaps are necessary for discovery. You have to hypothesize, but they have to be tempered with really rigorous testing. And the history of how we evaluate knowledge ties right back to this, specifically through empiricism and its powerful outgrowth, positivism.
Empiricism is the philosophy that says all knowledge comes from experience, right? It's all dependent on data we get from our senses, what we see, hear, touch.
Right. And this led to positivism, which was championed by the philosopher Auguste Comte. Positivism held that the highest, maybe the only, form of valid knowledge is the objective description of sensory phenomena. It basically equated knowledge with fixed, verifiable truth.
So positivism really dominated for a long time. It drove this search for ultimate fixed truth in science. But this is where we get to the aha moment for the advanced learner. That rigid view got some major necessary critiques.
This is so critical. Philosophers like John Dewey, they fundamentally challenge this idea that knowledge is some fixed reality we just uncover. The modern view is that knowledge is emergent.
Meaning it's interactive with experience, it requires continuous interpretation.
Exactly. So instead of thinking, I need to find the one immutable truth about this intervention, the modern professional thinks, how effective is this action in this specific context? And how do I have to continuously interpret and adjust its application?
So the focus shifts from, is this absolutely true everywhere, to the more pragmatic question. Does this action reliably achieve the outcome I want when I deploy it here?
Yes. Knowledge and advancement, under this view, emerge from interpretive descriptions of the effectiveness of actions. And that philosophical shift, it really sets the stage for the complexity of evidence-based practice today, because it acknowledges that context matters just as much as the data.
Okay, so that philosophical grounding is essential. Once we accept that knowledge is emergent and contextual, we have to start categorizing the evidence we use to make judgments. The sources are really clear about delineating evidence based on where it comes from and what it's for.
Right, we classify evidence into two broad categories: external evidence and internal evidence. External evidence is what's generated through rigorous research, think large-scale, methodologically sound studies like randomized controlled trials or RCTs.
And the main point of external evidence is generalizability. It's designed so that the findings should be applicable and predictive in other similar settings, right? It's meant to create universal guidelines.
In sharp contrast, you have internal evidence, which is often called local evidence. This is highly specific. It's generated through practice initiatives within a specific organization, using data unique to that, setting their patients, their workflow, their resources.
I think that practical difference is so important here. Internal evidence is incredibly valuable for quality improvement locally. It's transferable. You might share your results with a clinic next door, but it's generally not generalizable to entirely different settings because that local context is just inseparable from the data.
And we're seeing newer terminology now that complicates this even more, specifically real-world data, RWD, and real-world evidence, RWE. This speaks directly to that need for speed in this emergent knowledge environment.
So RWE is evidence you gather in routine clinical care or at home or in the community as opposed to in a highly controlled academic research setting. Why is this becoming so important now?
Because of the need for timely, large-scale results. RWE is being used alongside rigorous RCTs, for example, to accelerate drug development, especially when a traditional slow RCT might be impractical or even unethical, like for a rare disease.
And this data is coming from electronic health records, claims data.
Patient-generated data, all of it. But the sources caution us, and this is where the evaluator's rigor really gets tested. Even though RW offers speed and scale, you have to be extremely careful.
Why is that?
Because the quality of RWD can suffer a lot due to unclear methodology. It's often generated by systems or people who don't have specific research training, so the data might be messy, incomplete, or collected inconsistently. You have to weigh that trade-off.
The speed and scale of RWE versus the often lower methodological quality compared to a gold standard RCT. The rigor of vetting RWE has to be higher.
Absolutely. And the evaluation of the source material itself is paramount. Beyond primary and secondary sources, we have to talk about that critical body of material that often gets dismissed: gray literature.
So gray literature is basically materials produced outside of traditional publishing channels, right?
Exactly. It's a huge and often overlooked segment. We're talking about unpublished research reports, government evaluations, doctoral dissertations, preprints, white papers from NGOs, conference proceedings.
Okay, but let's address the skepticism. If the gold standard is a level I RCT published in a peer-reviewed journal, why should a professional risk basing a critical decision on, say, an unpublished dissertation that hasn't been through that external review?
That's the challenge. But you can't just dismiss it, because it often contains incredibly relevant, timely, and hyper-local information. Think about a CDC field report or an internal state audit. If you ignore it, you miss critical context.
So the burden of proof is on you, the evaluator.
The quality assurance rests entirely on your shoulders, not on a journal editor's. You have to vet the institution that produced it, the transparency of the methodology, everything.
And that brings us to the ultimate authority in evaluating intervention questions, the hierarchy of scientific evidence. This is the framework for determining how much confidence we should place in a specific finding.
This hierarchy is crucial because it defines that gold standard of rational judgment. It's usually presented as 7 levels, moving from the weakest evidence, which is the highest risk of bias, to the strongest, with the lowest risk of bias.
Let's start at the bottom. Level 7, the weakest, is evidence from the opinion of authorities, expert committees, clinical experience. It's important for framing an issue, but it's highly subjective.
Moving up, level 6 is evidence from a single descriptive or qualitative study. Level V is a systematic review of those studies. We're dealing with contextual, experiential data here. Important, but low in predictive power.
Level 4 gives us quantitative data from well-designed case control and cohort studies. We're comparing groups, but it's still observational.
Level 3 is evidence from well-designed controlled trials that operate without randomization. These are quasi-experimental designs. They have a control group, but the lack of randomization means there's a risk of selection bias. The groups might just be different to begin with.
And the gold standard really starts at level 2, which is evidence from at least one well-designed randomized controlled trial, an RCT. The magic of randomization is that it statistically distributes all those known and unknown confounding variables evenly across the groups.
And the pinnacle, level line, isn't just one study. It's the highest statistical power possible, evidence from a systematic review of all relevant RCTs or guidelines based on them. This includes meta-analysis, where you statistically pool the results of multiple studies to create one overwhelming dataset.
So level I is telling you what the entire body of rigorous empirical research agrees upon for a specific intervention. It's as close as we get to a deduction based on a universal premise.
But, and this is a big but, not all questions can be answered with an RCT. Think about the subjective experience of living with a chronic condition. This is why we absolutely cannot dismiss qualitative research, which focuses on that human experience and context.
Qualitative research is vital when we don't know much about a phenomenon. It collects word data to uncover themes and patterns without expecting statistical generalizability. It's about the context, the individual differences, the subjective perspective.
Let's quickly break down the 3 major types. The first is grounded theory research.
Grounded theory focuses on social interaction, and the goal is to generate a theory that is literally grounded in the data you get from observations. You don't start with a theory to test. The theory emerges from the field.
The rigor is all in the methodology. A study on implementing evidence-based nursing in Iran used this. Imagine a researcher with hours of raw interview data. First, they do open coding, breaking the text down into tiny pieces and tagging them. Time constraints, lack of training, unsupportive manager.
Then comes axial coding, where you link those categories to find relationships. They might find time constraints is frequently linked to unsupportive manager, leading to a broader pattern like resource allocation as a barrier.
Finally, selective coding identifies the core category that explains the whole process. In that study, this rigorous process confirmed complex themes about self-confidence, time, and the work environment. The theory, the why, is built block by block from lived experiences.
Then you have ethnographic research, which describes the culture or life ways of a specific group, like a patient population or a clinical unit. It involves deep immersion.
And the power of this is shown in that striking example from the source. The interview with a post-stroke aphasia patient. The patient, who was a teacher before her stroke, was struggling to articulate the profound change.
She said, "Before teacher, now I don't know what," and then later, when asked about her day, she just shrugged and pointed to the TV saying, "Nothing here."
That narrative, a life reduced from an intellectual profession to just watching TV, illustrates a profound change that you just cannot appreciate in objective technical descriptions of disease outcomes, like a motor function score.
It's why qualitative data is necessary for a holistic view. It tells us not just what happened, but what it means to the person it happened to.
And finally, there's phenomenological research. This aims to understand a phenomenon by recognizing the meaning of an experience as lived by the participants. It seeks the essence of an experience, like chronic pain or the feelings of women in fertility treatment. It enriches our understanding of the broader human dimensions that statistics simply can't capture.
So we know where evidence comes from, we know how it's ranked, but levelized status doesn't mean anything if the study itself is fundamentally flawed. Now we have to move into the essential critical appraisal tools that you, the listener, must use.
Right.
When you're appraising a quantitative study for practice, you have 3 core non-negotiable questions. Is it valid? Is it reliable? Is it applicable?
We have to start with validity, because that speaks to the truthfulness of the measurement. And the biggest threats to validity are the mechanisms of bias and confounding variables.
Let's talk about interviewer bias. The ideal interviewer is a neutral agent, just recording answers. But human interaction is so complex, a nod, a change in tone, a leading question, it can introduce inaccuracies.
And that inaccuracy often stems from the interviewer's preference for the outcome. If I secretly want this new protocol to succeed, I might unconsciously probe more for positive answers or downplay the negative ones. My bias can subtly skew the entire data collection.
But even if we eliminate that human element, there are systemic threats, and none is more important for a professional to understand than confounding variables.
This is the critical connection. A confounding factor is an event or variable that's outside the researcher's control, and it interferes with your ability to attribute the outcome solely to the intervention you're studying. It gives you an alternative explanation for your results.
Okay, so let's say a researcher is studying a new VR therapy to reduce patient anxiety before surgery, but during the study, a local hospital starts offering free, high-quality pre-surgical classes, and some of the participants go to those classes.
That's a classic confounder. It makes it extremely difficult to know if the reduction in anxiety is from the VR therapy, the free education, or both. The validity of your conclusion that the VR therapy works is threatened.
Our sources have that classic, powerful example of this problem, the asbestos confounder. It's the perfect illustration.
It is. In that historical public health study, researchers were comparing lung cancer and smoking across different regions. Initially, they found one specific region had a shocking rate of lung cancer death among smokers, a 15-fold increase.
The immediate inductive conclusion would be that something about the tobacco in that region was particularly potent.
But the critical detective work found the confounding factor, occupational exposure. These specific smokers had also worked for years in asbestos coal mines. So when the researchers statistically controlled for the variable of working with asbestos, basically mathematically removing its influence, the cancer rate due to smoking in that region normalized. It became nearly identical to the rest of the country.
So the analysis revealed that asbestos exposure was the true independent variable driving that horrifying outcome. Without identifying and controlling for that confounder, the public health judgment on smoking risk would have been deeply misleading.
Absolutely. Validity ensuring the methods are sound and free from bias is paramount. But a study can be valid and still be useless if it's not consistent. And that consistency is encapsulated in the concept of reliability.
So reliability is the ability of an instrument to measure something consistently over time. If you use the same tool repeatedly on the same stable population, do you get similar results?
Exactly. And a specific type, which is crucial for any complex evaluation, is inter-rater reliability. This measures the agreement between different observers rating the same thing. Think of two clinicians rating a pressure ulcer.
Because people inherently see things differently, you need strategies to ensure high reliability.
Yes. You have to clearly define the variables, zero ambiguity. You develop detailed, objective criteria. And critically, you ensure all researchers get uniform, standardized training until they demonstrate they agree consistently. If your inter-rater reliability is low, your data is just noise, not signal.
We also have to address abstract concepts, which are, the bread and butter of advanced practice things you can't just measure with a thermometer. This brings us to construct validity.
A construct is an abstract, non-observable, entity-like interprofessional collaboration or burnout. Construct validity is the extent to which your instrument actually measures that theoretical construct.
The threat here is a mismatch between the concept and how you operationalize it. If you say you're measuring burnout, but your instrument only measures hours worked and sleep duration, you've only collected peripheral evidence.
Right. Burnout is a multifaceted psychological construct, and your operationalization is just too narrow. The key takeaway is that validity is never a binary yes or no. It's always a determination of degree. We're always striving for a higher degree of validity.
Okay, finally, let's get into the language of the numbers. Let's briefly review the key statistical measures that evaluators use, because these are the metrics that put a number on risk and benefit.
These metrics quantify the strength of the evidence. We often see the odds ratio, or R. This compares the odds of an adverse outcome, say, a complication in the experimental group versus the control group.
And the interpretation is key. If the OR is 1.0, the intervention has no effect. If it's greater than 1.0, the intervention increases the odds of the bad outcome. And if the OR is less than 1.0, the event is less likely in the intervention group.
So an OR of 0.7 means the intervention reduces the odds of that adverse event by 30%. That's significant.
Then you have the relative risk ratio, RR. This is the risk of an outcome in the treatment group compared with the control group. Again, RR of 1.0 means no difference.
We also calculate the absolute risk reduction, ARR. This is the simple difference in risk. If 10% of the control group gets an infection, but only 4% of the intervention group does, the ARR is 6%. It tells you the direct magnitude of the benefit.
And maybe the most practical metric for translating evidence into daily practice is the number needed to treat, NNT.
Yes, the NNT. It's the inverse of the ARR. It calculates how many patients you have to treat over a given time to prevent one adverse outcome.
And that's what lets you defend a protocol change to a hospital board. If a new expensive drug has an NNT of 5, that means you only have to treat 5 patients to save one from a major complication. That's a powerful argument.
Conversely, if a drug has an NNT of 150, you have to seriously question the cost and practicality of implementing that universally. These measures, they quantify the strength of the evidence and its application in the real world. It moves this discussion far beyond just opinion.
Okay, we've covered the rigorous collection, ranking, and appraisal of evidence. The intellectual foundation is set. Now, the crucial step. How do sophisticated organizations actually translate this validated, reliable level evidence into consistent practice change? They rely on formal conceptual frameworks.
Correct. Models originally designed for pure research utilization are the historical precursors to modern evidence-based practice, or EBP, models. These models provide that necessary systematic algorithmic structure to ensure change isn't just random.
And one of the most widely used models is the Iowa model revised. It's highly algorithmic, designed to guide organizational practice change through a series of logical steps.
It starts by identifying a triggering issue. This could be problem-focused, like a rise in infections, or knowledge-focused. A new level I review shows a vastly superior method for something.
Once that trigger is identified and prioritized, the mandate is clear. Form a multidisciplinary team to assemble, appraise, and synthesize the body of evidence. This is where all that rigor we just discussed comes into play.
And a key decision point in the Iowa model is there sufficient evidence? If the answer is no, the model mandates that the organization has to actually conduct research to generate the necessary evidence. They don't just proceed based on opinion.
But if the answer is yes, they move to designing and piloting the practice change, which includes collecting baseline data before they start, and then finally integrating and sustaining the change.
Let's use a quick example. A hospital sees its ventilator-associated pneumonia, or VAP, rates spike. That's the trigger. The team synthesizes level I evidence on VAP prevention bundles and finds sufficient evidence for 5 key measures.
So they pilot the new bundle on one ICU for 3 months, collecting VAP rates as their baseline data. If it's successful, they hardwire the change into the system.
Right. New policy, integrating it into electronic records, adjusting supply purchasing, and the model emphasizes sustaining the change through continuous monitoring. It's a perpetual cycle of improvement.
Another important framework is the Paris model promoting action on research implementation in health services. This one suggests that successful evidence integration depends on the interaction of 3 major factors:
The nature of the evidence itself, the context of the change, and the mechanism of facilitating that change.
The genius of Paris is that it acknowledges that even perfect level I evidence will fail if the organizational context is toxic or if the facilitation method is poor.
Context is everything. Is the culture receptive to change? Is leadership supportive? Facilitation is the process of getting people to engage, the coaching, the training, removing barriers. Paris tells us that context and facilitation are just as critical as the evidence itself. It's a pragmatic recognition of behavioral reality.
Beyond these big models, practitioners also use statistical analysis to inform their designs, particularly using correlation to find predictive relationships.
Correlation lets us examine patterns without claiming direct cause and effect. It measures the strength of the relationship between 2 variables, from 0 to 1 or make it.
So a coefficient between 0 and 1 is a positive correlation. The source uses income and years of education. As one goes up, the other tends to go up.
And a coefficient between 0 and make 1 is a negative correlation. For example, GPA and hours of TV use. As TV use increases, GPA tends to decrease. And it's important to remember that a negative coefficient of 0.8 shows a much stronger relationship than a positive one of 0.2. The sign just indicates the direction.
The relevance for you, the listener, is profound here. Correlation studies are essential for guiding intervention design. If you find a strong negative correlation between a patient's initial attitude toward a new medication and their compliance 3 months later,
that predictive relationship becomes actionable immediately. You don't need a new trial. You can use that data right away to design educational strategies targeted specifically at those with negative attitudes at the start. Correlation tells you where to focus your resources.
This kind of analysis feeds directly into the need for professionals to participate in collaborative, knowledge-generating research. And once that evidence is generated, effective dissemination is the final step.
And there's a crucial trade-off every researcher faces between speed and rigor.
Journal publications offer the highest rigor. They're peer-reviewed, but the delay can be a year or more, which holds back important treatments.
Oral reports at conferences are much more timely. They lack the formal rigor, but they allow for rapid communication of emergent, valuable information.
A recognized best practice for this within an organization is the journal club model. It formalizes the process of continuous critical appraisal.
The 9 steps outlined in our source material are a mini algorithm for quality improvement. It starts with choosing a specific clinical question, deriving all the literature, and then critically appraising the highest level evidence.
The discussion then focuses on the critical appraisal, the validity, reliability, the NNTs, and then the implications for their local practice, applying that paratest lens.
And the last 2 steps are key for ongoing improvement: creating a centralized resource folder and developing a system for ongoing evaluation of outcomes. It's a formal, shared mechanism for continuous organizational improvement.
Okay. We have now defined the gold standard of rigor. We know the hierarchy, the threats, the statistics, the models to implement change. Intellectually, the path to excellence is laid out in level I evidence.
Which brings us to the shocking psychological reality. Why, when we have this clear, evidence-based plan for excellence, does execution fail so often? Why does the rational plan just collapse?
We are now shifting gears entirely, moving from the scientific rigor of external evidence to the tangled interior monologue of the human brain, what one source brilliantly calls the procrastinator system. This is where those behavioral hurdles undermine everything we just learned.
The transition here is profound. We have the intellectual tools for level I performance, the Iowa model. We can calculate an NNT of 5, but we struggle daily to move from knowing to doing. The source uses this brilliant measurable analogy from a conceptual MRI scan to analyze the procrastinator's brain.
Okay, so in this conceptual brain, there are 3 main components. First, there's the hero, the part of us that reads the level I reviews and makes the long-term plan. The rational decision maker, RDM.
The RDM is entirely logical. It understands the big picture. It visualizes the future, the successful project, the health benefits, the career milestones. It makes the detailed plan and wants us to do whatever makes sense right now.
And then there's the villain, the anti-RDM agent, the saboteur of all rational plans, the instant gratification monkey.
The monkey is the absolute enemy of the long-term plan because he lives entirely, 100%, in the present moment. He has no memory of the past, he doesn't remember the pain of the last-minute scramble, and he has no knowledge of the future.
He only cares about 2 things.
Easy and fun. That's it.
Ah.
Which, in the animal world, that works great. But in our civilization, the monkey does not understand mortgage payments or quarterly reports.
The conflict happens the moment the RDM makes a rational decision. Monday morning. The evidence shows starting this project today is best.
And the monkey looks at that difficult task, decides it's not easy, and immediately takes the wheel of the brain.
And what follows is that extended spiral into unrelated, low-effort activities that is so relatable. The RDM is trying to focus on complex data, but the monkey insists we must first read the entire Wikipedia page of some defunct 80s sitcom star.
Then maybe check the fridge, which we checked 15 minutes ago, just in case new food spontaneously generated. And that's followed by the notorious YouTube spiral that starts with a legitimate scientific lecture and ends, 3 hours later, with amateur footage of someone attempting a unicycle stunt in a dinosaur costume.
The RDM is just left sighing in frustration as the scheduled work hours evaporate. And this leads the procrastinator into a specific, emotionally costly zone.
This is the dark playground. It's the orange zone, where leisure activities happen at times when they absolutely should not be happening.
And the sources emphasize the steep emotional cost. The fun you have there is unearned. You're doing enjoyable things, but the atmosphere of the dark playground is just saturated with dread, guilt, anxiety, and self-hatred.
It's not real rest or enjoyment because that looming responsibility is constantly whispering in the background. So the central question becomes, if the monkey is always driving, how does the procrastinator ever get that vital project done?
How do they get over to that necessary blue zone where the hard, important things, the level I actions, actually happen?
The answer is the procrastinator's terrifying guardian angel, the only external force that can physically scare the monkey away. The panic monster.
The panic monster is the only thing the instant gratification monkey is absolutely terrified of. The monster is dormant most of the time, letting the monkey run wild, but he wakes up instantly whenever a deadline is imminent.
Or there's a danger of public embarrassment, career disaster, or some other scary immediate consequence.
We see this play out all the time. The source recounts that true story of writing a 90-page senior thesis. The rational plan was a year of steady work, but the monkey derailed it until only 3 days remained and not a single word was written.
The sheer immediate pressure of that deadline triggers the panic monster, who appears and starts screaming. In the chaos, the monkey is forced up a tree. He runs and hides, and that allows the rational decision maker to briefly take the wheel and complete the task in a frantic, compressed burst of activity.
This explains those extreme behaviors we've all seen or done. The 72-hour work marathon, the 2 all-nighters, that sudden hyper-focus just as the clock hits 0. The RDM gets to work, but only under the duress of imminent failure.
So in the short term, with an external deadline, the procrastinator system, RDM, monkey, panic monster, it's functional, if terrifying and inefficient.
Yeah.
It works to meet the deadline, but it's entirely dependent on that external pressure.
While the panic monster successfully saves us from short-term deadlines, the analysis points out that there are actually 2 fundamentally different kinds of procrastination, and the second one is far more dangerous to long-term fulfillment.
Everything we've talked about so far, the thesis, the report due Friday, that's deadline procrastination. The effects are contained, however messily, because the panic monster eventually shows up and forces the work to be completed. There's a resolution.
The true behavioral crisis, which directly violates the principle of living an evidence-based life, is non-deadline procrastination. This is the less visible, privately suffered type that occurs when there is no external clock ticking.
This is where we see the slow erosion of our level I personal and professional goals. This happens with critical long-term pursuits. Building a business, pursuing an artistic goal, consistently exercising and taking care of your health, or investing time in crucial relationships.
And why is this so dangerous, especially for our listener who is trained in level I evidence and systematic planning?
Because if the procrastinator's only mechanism for doing hard, non-fun things is the panic monster, and there are no external deadlines for your health or your self-starter goals, the panic monster never wakes up.
So the effects of this long-term procrastination are not contained. They extend outward forever, unmitigated. The rational decision maker keeps making the rational plan. I need to start exercising 3 times a week. But the monkey just drives the brain back to the dark playground day after day, year after year.
And this quiet, private suffering becomes the source of a huge amount of long-term unhappiness and regret. The defining frustration, as the source material puts it, is feeling like a spectator in your own life, unable to start chasing your important goals.
So they're not frustrated that they couldn't achieve their dreams. They're frustrated they weren't even able to start chasing them.
Exactly. They have the level I evidence for what makes a life well-lived, the health, the meaningful work, the relationships, but the monkey is silently, perpetually sabotaging the implementation.
This realization leads to a kind of universal truth. Non-procrastinators don't really exist. The instant gratification monkey is in all of us, even those who look highly successful. And he's sneakiest when deadlines are absent.
The monkey is fine with you starting a new project in 2 weeks, because 2 weeks isn't now, and only now matters to him. But 2 weeks becomes 2 months, which becomes 2 years.
The solution to this isn't just a better organizational system or another study on time management. It's a profound awareness tool that forces the RDM to face the reality of non-renewal, the life calendar visualization.
The life calendar is visualized as one box for every week of a hypothetical 90-year life. And when you see that total represented visually, this finite grid that can never be refilled, it provides a powerful existential awareness tool.
It essentially forces the panic monster to wake up, not due to an external deadline like a due date, but due to the overwhelming personal internal reality of the limited quantity of life.
This finite visualization prompts the realization that we have to stop procrastinating on what truly matters, because the external deadline for those biggest life changes may not appear until it is fundamentally too late. The rigor of level I evidence tells us what to do. The life calendar tells us when we must start doing it.
What an incredible journey, moving from the philosophical rigor of knowledge all the way down into the tangled internal wiring of the human brain. We started by defining the sheer, almost intimidating intellectual effort required to truly evaluate evidence correctly.
We did.
We saw the necessity of logic, the vital role of statistics like the odds ratio and the NNT, and the non-negotiable mandate to check for bias and root out confounding variables, using that vivid example of the asbestos confounder drastically skewing observational risk.
And we established that high-functioning organizations rely on these highly detailed algorithmic models, like the Iowa Model Revised, which are specifically designed for systemic excellence. We have the hierarchy of evidence, proclaiming level I systematic reviews and RCTs as the undisputed gold standard for rational judgment. Intellectually, the path is clearly mapped out.
But the profound tension lies entirely in the behavioral follow-through. We possess these incredible intellectual tools for achieving excellence, yet we are frequently and consistently hijacked by the instant gratification monkey, preventing us from ever moving out of the dark playground to implement what we know is the best, most effective, evidence-based action.
The rational plan fails because the psychological mechanism is hijacked by that desire for easy and fun now.
The implication for the advanced professional is stark. In the world of evidence-based evaluation, we are taught to trust level I findings, the product of systematic, rigorous inquiry.
But if we only rely on the external panic monster to compel action on our most crucial, non-deadline life goals, our health, our relationships, our true professional direction, and that monster never appears, are we truly living an evidence-based life?
And that raises the final provocative thought we want to leave you with, one that connects level I evidence directly to the life calendar. What internal mechanism, what piece of internal logic, or what powerful realization of finitude can we develop to make the rational decision maker the consistent voice of level I evidence, compelling action in our daily deadline-free choices?
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the tension between rigor and reality.
We'll see you next time.